Hey, what is up everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There are things worse than death in the grim darkness of the far future. Fates that make a clean end in battle seem like mercy itself. And among all the horrors that await those who serve the Imperium of man, few are as insidious as the one presented as the highest honor a space marine can receive. They call it salvation. They call it a sacred duty. They speak of it in reverent whispers as the ultimate expression of devotion to the Emperor. But those who have lived it, those who have awakened inside the cold embrace of adamantium and ceramite, with nothing left of their bodies but fragments suspended in nutrient slurry, they know a different truth. This is the story of what happens when you're sealed inside a dreadnought forever in Warhammer 40,000. This is the story of a living death that can last for 10,000 years. Imagine for a moment that you are one of the Adeptus Astartes, a space marine, humanity's finest warrior. Your body is a masterwork of genetic engineering, a fusion of human potential and scientific achievement that has transformed you into something beyond mortal. You stand 8 feet tall in your power armor, and you carry within you the gene seed of your Primarch, a demigod who walked beside the Emperor himself during the Great Crusade. You have known the thunder of bolter fire and the screaming of chainswords biting through enemy flesh. You have stood shoulder to shoulder with your battle brothers in the great halls of your fortress monastery, raising your voice in hymns of war and devotion. You have tasted victory on 100 worlds, and felt the rush of adrenaline as your twin hearts pump enhanced blood through veins that can seal their own wounds. You are a weapon in human form, and you are glorious. But even space marines are not truly immortal. Even these enhanced warriors, these angels of death, can fall. And when they fall, when the injuries are too catastrophic for even the miraculous abilities of an apothecary to repair, a choice must be made. Will this warrior be allowed to die with honor, to join his fallen brothers in the Emperor's grace? Or will he be saved, preserved, given what the chapter calls a second chance to serve? This is where the nightmare begins, because salvation in the 41st millennium is not always what it seems to be. A dreadnought stands between 12 and 15 feet tall, a towering construct of armored ceramite and adamantium plates. From the outside, it appears to be a walking tank, a heavily armed bipedal war machine that strides across battlefields with earth-shaking footfalls. Its arms mount weapons that would require vehicle mounts for any normal soldier. Assault cannons that can shred infantry formations in seconds, las cannons that can punch through tank armor like tissue paper, missile launchers that rain death from above. One hand might carry a power fist large enough to crush a vehicle, while the other brings a heavy flamer that turns the battlefield into an inferno. It is an instrument of war on a scale that dwarfs even the Terminator armor worn by a chapter's most elite veterans. But a dreadnought is not a robot. It is not some soulless automaton controlled by machine spirits alone. At its heart, buried deep within the armored chassis, protected by layer upon layer of blessed ceramite and adamantium, there is a sarcophagus. And inside that sarcophagus, suspended in amniotic fluid and kept alive by life support systems that hum with an eternal vigilance, there is what remains of a space marine, not a whole warrior, not the proud figure who once strode through the halls of the fortress monastery, but fragments, a torso perhaps, if enough of it survived. Vital organs kept functioning through artificial means. A brain still capable of thought, still aware, still conscious. A skull locked into position by neural interface cables that burrow deep into grey matter and spinal column. This is not a machine piloted by a person. This is a tomb that happens to move, and the person inside it has been sealed there until the day when the sarcophagus is finally breached and the spark of consciousness within is allowed to fade into true death. The chapters of the Adeptus Astartes present entombment in a dreadnought as the highest honor that can be bestowed upon a fallen warrior. They speak of it in terms of sacred duty, of service that extends beyond the mortal span, of wisdom preserved for future generations. When a space marine is chosen for this fate, there are ceremonies. Chaplains intone prayers. Tech priests perform their sacred rites. The warriors' battle brothers gather to witness what they are told is a glorious transformation, a rebirth in iron and faith. The chapter's librarians may speak of the honored ancient who will guide them for centuries to come. The young initiates look upon the dreadnought with awe, seeing in it a monument to valor and dedication. But this is a beautiful lie wrapped around a terrible truth. Because to be entombed in a dreadnought is to have everything that made you human stripped away piece by piece, until all that remains is a consciousness trapped in a metal shell, awakened only for war, sleeping away the centuries in a darkness so complete that it makes true death seem preferable. It is to watch as everyone you knew, everyone you loved, everyone who remembered you as you were, dies and turns to dust while you persist. It is to forget your own face, your own voice, the sensation of drawing breath or feeling sunlight on skin. It is to become a weapon that thinks, a gun that remembers, a monument to the cruelty of a galaxy that values service above mercy. The Imperium of man spans 1,000,000 worlds and encompasses countless trillions of souls. It is a civilization in terminal decline, beset on all sides by enemies that seek its utter annihilation. Orc hordes that sweep across entire sectors with savage fury. Tyrannid hive fleets that devour planets down to bedrock. Chaos, forces that seek to tear reality itself apart. The traitorous forces of alien empires that see humanity as nothing more than obstacles to be removed. In such a galaxy, every resource must be conserved, every advantage pressed, every tool used until it breaks and then repaired and used again. And the wisdom of a veteran space marine, the tactical acumen gained through centuries of warfare, the memories of campaigns fought and enemies defeated. These are resources far too valuable to simply let die when the flesh that contains them fails. This is the cold calculation that underlies the practice of dreadnought entombment. It is not truly about honor, though honor is the language used to describe it. It is about the preservation of knowledge, the continuation of service, the extraction of every last measure of utility from a warrior who has given everything and is now being asked to give even more. The chapters may dress it up in ritual and reverence, but at its core, the decision to entomb a space marine in a dreadnought is a pragmatic one, made by leaders who know that experience is irreplaceable and that in a galaxy of endless war, they cannot afford to lose the lessons learned by their most accomplished veterans. And so, when a space marine falls on the battlefield, when his body is broken beyond repair but some spark of life remains, the apothecaries make their assessment. Can this warrior be saved in the conventional sense? Can his wounds be healed, his organs replaced, his body reconstructed so that he might walk and fight as he did before? Or has the damage gone too far, leaving only ruin and remnants? If the answer is the latter, and if the warrior in question has distinguished himself sufficiently, has proven his worth through decades or centuries of exemplary service, then the recommendation is made. This one, they say, should be preserved. This one should be given to the machines. This one should become one of the ancient ones, the venerable dead who refuse to die. The path to entombment begins with catastrophe. A space marine does not simply decide to become a dreadnought. He does not volunteer for this fate. It is not a reward he seeks or an honor he requests. It is something that happens to him when his body fails so completely that no other option remains. And the nature of the injuries required to qualify for entombment is, in itself, a horror that defies easy description. Consider what it takes to mortally wound a space marine. These are warriors whose bodies have been enhanced far beyond human norms. They possess two hearts instead of one, ensuring that if one is destroyed, the other can maintain circulation. Their blood coagulates almost instantly, sealing wounds that would cause a normal human to bleed out in seconds. Their skeleton is sheathed in a layer of ceramite, making their bones nearly unbreakable. Their muscles are dense with enhanced fiber that grants them strength enough to bend steel. They can survive in vacuum for extended periods. They can endure radiation that would kill an unaugmented human in minutes. They can fight on with injuries that would incapacitate anyone else. Their superhuman physiology compensating for damage that should be lethal. So when we speak of injuries catastrophic enough to necessitate Dreadnought entombment, we are talking about trauma on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. A spine snapped completely in half, leaving the warrior paralyzed from the neck down. Multiple organs liquefied by a plasma blast, their functions irreplaceable even by the advanced augmetics that Space Marine chapters possess. Limbs torn away, not cleanly but crushed and mangled beyond any hope of reattachment. Massive head trauma that leaves the brain damaged, but somehow, impossibly, still functional. Exposure to toxins so virulent that the flesh itself begins to necrotize, spreading faster than even enhanced healing can counter. These are the kinds of wounds that create dreadnoughts, injuries so severe that when the apothecaries arrive on the battlefield to harvest gene seed from the fallen, they find themselves faced with a warrior who should be dead, but somehow, against all odds, is not. The decision to entomb a Space Marine is not made lightly. Dreadnought sarcophagi are rare and precious, relics of ancient technology that cannot be easily replicated. Each chapter possesses only a handful of these devices, and they guard them jealously. The process of entombment is complex, requiring the skills of the most accomplished tech priests and taking many weeks to complete. And there is always the risk that the process will fail, that the warrior will die before he can be successfully integrated with the machine, or that some incompatibility will render the entombment unstable. So the warriors chosen for this fate are not simply any Space Marine who suffers grievous wounds. They are heroes. Veterans who have served for decades or centuries. Captains who led companies to victory. Champions who single-handedly turned the tide of crucial battles. Ancient warriors whose wisdom and experience have already proven invaluable to the chapter countless times. When the decision is made, the wounded Space Marine is transported to the chapter's fortress monastery with all possible speed. Time is of the essence, because even the enhanced physiology of an Astartes has its limits. The warrior is brought to the deepest levels of the fortress, to chambers that are part surgical theatre, part sacred shrine, and part workshop of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Here, tech priests in red robes and apothecaries in white gather around the broken body, their servo arms and medical equipment forming a forest of metal and purpose around the warrior who lies before them. And here, in this place of cold tiles and humming machinery, the transformation begins. The surgery that creates a dreadnought is not like any operation performed on the living. It is, in many ways, the preparation of a corpse, except that the corpse must remain conscious throughout, must be kept aware and responsive, even as it is systematically dismantled and reduced to its most essential components. Anesthesia is used sparingly because the tech priests need to monitor neural responses, need to ensure that the connections they are making between flesh and machine are establishing properly. And so the Space Marine endures. He lies on the surgical slab while they cut away everything that cannot be saved, everything that is too damaged to preserve. Limbs are removed first, severed at the joints, or higher if the damage extends too far. These are not the clean amputations of a field hospital, but brutal dissections. The tech priests consulting readouts and scanning equipment as they determine exactly how much must be taken. Arms that once wielded power weapons are reduced to stumps. Legs that carried the warrior across 100 battlefields are cut away entirely. The torso is opened and the damaged organs are assessed. Those that can be salvaged are left in place, kept functioning by temporary life support systems. Those that cannot are removed, the space they occupied filled with augmetic replacements or simply left empty, to be filled later with the nutrient systems that will sustain what remains. The spine, if it survives at all, is reinforced with adamantium rods and neural interface ports. These ports are the key to the entire process, for they will allow the warrior's nervous system to connect with the Dreadnought's control systems, enabling him to move the machine as if it were his own body. Hundreds of hair-thin wires are threaded through the spinal column, each one carefully positioned to interface with specific nerve clusters. The brain itself is accessed through the skull, ports drilled directly into the bone, so that connections can be made to the cerebral cortex and the various regions responsible for motor control, sensory processing, and higher cognitive function. By the end of this process, what remains of the Space Marine barely resembles anything that was once human. The body is gone, reduced to a torso, perhaps including the shoulders and the upper portion of the chest cavity. The head remains, though the face may be so damaged that it no longer retains recognizable features. Inside this remnant, the vital organs continue to function, one or both hearts, the lungs if they survived, portions of the digestive system, though they will never again process food in any conventional sense. The brain, most crucially, is intact enough to support consciousness, though it is now festooned with neural interface cables and monitoring equipment that will track its function for the rest of the warrior's existence. This remnant, this fragment of what was once a proud space marine, is then lowered into the sarcophagus that will be its home for centuries or millennia to come. The sarcophagus is not a spacious chamber. It is a cramped cylinder, barely large enough to contain the torso and head, its interior lined with connectors and life support equipment. The remnant is positioned carefully, oriented so that the head faces forward, aligned with the sensors that will eventually allow the warrior to see what the Dreadnought sees. And then the amniotic fluid begins to flow. The fluid is a complex mixture of nutrients, oxygen-carrying compounds, and medical agents designed to sustain life indefinitely. It fills the sarcophagus completely, surrounding the remnant of the Space Marine's body in a warm, viscous embrace. The sensation, for those few warriors who later attempt to describe their first entombment, is one of drowning, of suffocation, even though the fluid is carrying oxygen directly to the lungs. It is the feeling of being buried alive in something that is neither air nor water, but some hybrid of both, something that presses in from all sides with unrelenting pressure. As the fluid fills the chamber, the final connections are made. Neural interface cables, dozens of them, are plugged into the ports that have been installed in the warrior's spine and skull. Each connection brings a jolt of sensation, sometimes pain, sometimes something stranger and harder to define. The warrior's nervous system is being invaded, infiltrated by foreign connections that will allow the machine to speak directly to his brain, and his brain to speak directly to the machine. It is a violation on the most fundamental level, the destruction of the boundary between self and not self, the forced merger of organic consciousness with mechanical systems. And then, when all the connections are complete, when the life support systems are online, and the neural interfaces are tested and found functional, the sarcophagus is sealed. The lid closes with a heavy thud that echoes through the chamber, and the warrior inside is plunged into darkness. Not the darkness of closed eyes, which can still sense light filtering through the lids, but absolute darkness. The darkness of the tomb, the darkness of burial. He cannot move. The fluid around him prevents any motion, and in any case, he no longer has limbs with which to move. He cannot speak. His vocal cords, if they survive the surgery at all, are submerged in fluid and cannot produce sound. He can only think, only be aware, only exist in this moment of terrible transition. This is when the Mind Impulse Unit, the MIU, is activated. This is the technology that will allow the warrior to control the Dreadnought, to translate his thoughts into the machine's actions. But the first activation is not a smooth process. It is an assault on the senses, unlike anything the warrior has experienced before. His brain, which has spent its entire existence processing input from human senses, eyes that see light, ears that hear sound, skin that feels touch, is suddenly flooded with alien data. Auspec's readouts appear in his consciousness like visions overlaid on darkness. Targeting reticules blossom in his mind's eye. Temperature readings, pressure sensors, radiation detectors, all of these feed directly into his awareness, and his brain struggles to make sense of them. The first time the warrior tries to move, to reach out with arms that no longer exist, the Dreadnought lurches. The massive metal limbs respond to neural impulses that are not yet calibrated, not yet refined. The warrior thinks forward, and the Dreadnought takes a stumbling step that shakes the entire chamber. He tries to grasp something, anything, and the power fist closes with such force that it crushes whatever it touched to fragments. The sensory input is overwhelming. The warrior can feel the Dreadnought's weight, but it is not the weight of his body. It is the weight of 12 tons of metal and machinery, and his brain has no reference for how to process this. He can see through the optical sensors, but what he sees is not natural vision. It is a composite of visual, infrared, and other spectra, all blended together in a way that makes the world look alien and wrong. Consider what this transformation of perception truly means. When the warrior was flesh and blood, vision came to him through eyes that had evolved over millions of years to process the visible spectrum of light. His brain had dedicated neural architecture for interpreting the signals from his retinas, converting them into the rich, three-dimensional experience of sight that humans take for granted. He could see colors with all their subtle variations. He could perceive depth through binocular vision and the tiny movements of his eyes. He could focus on details or take in a wide field of view at will. He could blink to clear his vision or squint against bright light. All of this happened automatically, the result of biological systems working in perfect harmony. Now all of that is gone. The Dreadnought's optical sensors provide data, not sight. They detect electromagnetic radiation across a range of frequencies far broader than human eyes ever could. Infrared signatures appear as colored overlays showing heat sources. Ultraviolet markers highlight certain materials and biological signatures. The visual information is filtered through targeting algorithms that automatically identify potential threats and classify them by type. Range-finding data appears as numerical readouts superimposed on the visual field. Threat assessment calculations suggest optimal firing solutions, and all of this floods into the warrior's consciousness simultaneously, a cacophony of visual information that bears only the slightest resemblance to what he once understood as seeing. The brain attempts to adapt. It takes this alien stream of data and tries to translate it into something comprehensible, something that maps onto the neural pathways that were designed for processing human vision. And to some degree, it succeeds. After days or weeks of practice, the Dreadnought pilot begins to understand what he is perceiving. He learns to interpret the infrared overlays, to read the targeting reticules, to process the threat assessments. The world becomes visible again, though not in the way it once was. He can navigate. He can identify enemies. He can aim his weapons with precision. Function is restored. But something essential is lost in this translation. The richness of visual experience, the aesthetic pleasure that comes from seeing a sunrise or the face of a battle brother, these things do not survive the transformation. The Dreadnought sees, but he does not see beauty. He perceives, but he does not appreciate. His vision has become purely functional, reduced to the identification of threats and the calculation of firing solutions. When he looks upon the fortress monastery that was his home, he does not see its architecture and history. He sees structural stress points, defensive positions, and areas vulnerable to bombardment. When he looks upon his battle brothers, he does not see their faces and the brotherhood they represent. He sees combat effectiveness ratings, tactical dispositions, and casualty risk assessments. And it is not just vision that suffers this transformation. Every sense is replaced by a mechanical analog that provides information without meaning. Hearing becomes the processing of audio data from dozens of pickups scattered across the Dreadnought's chassis. The warrior can detect sounds from all directions simultaneously, can filter out background noise to focus on specific frequencies, can even hear sounds beyond the range of human ears. But music becomes mere vibration patterns. The voices of his battle brothers lose their emotional resonance, becoming nothing more than phonemes to be passed for tactical information. The roar of battle, which once stirred his hearts and filled him with the fury of combat, becomes ambient noise to be analyzed and catalogued. Touch is perhaps the most alien of all the transformed senses. The Dreadnought has pressure sensors distributed across its armor, sensitive enough to detect when something is in contact with the chassis. When the power fist grasps an object, servos report the force being applied. When the Dreadnought walks, gyroscopes and accelerometers provide data about balance and movement. The brain receives all this information and attempts to construct from it something resembling proprioception, the innate sense of where one's body is in space. But the result is fundamentally wrong. The warrior knows that his Dreadnought is upright and balanced, but he does not feel it in the way he once felt the position of his own body. He knows when his power fist is crushing something, but he does not feel the resistance, the texture, the physical reality of the object being destroyed. And what of the senses that are simply absent? Taste and smell, those chemical senses that added flavor to human experience, are gone entirely. The Dreadnought has no tongue to taste with, no nasal passages to smell through. These senses can be approximated with chemical analyzers, sensors that detect specific molecules in the air or in liquids and report their presence. But the data these sensors provide is clinical, divorced from any experiential context. The Dreadnought can detect the chemical signature of promethium fuel or the pheromone markers of certain alien species, but he cannot smell the incense burned in the chapter's chapels during services. He cannot taste the ceremonial wine shared among battle brothers after a victory. These experiences, which helped bind him to his chapter and to his brothers, are lost forever. Even pain, that most fundamental of sensations, is transformed. A flesh and blood warrior feels pain when he is injured, a sharp and immediate signal that demands attention and action. The Dreadnought has damage sensors that alert him when his armor is breached or his systems are compromised. Warning icons appear in his vision. Alarms sound through his audio pickups. But it is not pain. It is information, delivered with the same emotional neutrality as any other data. When a Lascanon blast punches through his armor plating, he is aware of the damage. He can assess its severity and calculate its impact on his combat effectiveness. But he does not hurt. The wound does not throb or ache or burn. It is simply there, a fact to be acknowledged and incorporated into his tactical decision-making. This absence of pain might seem like a mercy, a relief from the suffering that the warrior's original body would have experienced from such injuries, but it is also profoundly alienating. Pain, for all its unpleasantness, serves an important function. It grounds us in our bodies. It reminds us that we are physical beings with physical vulnerabilities. It creates a visceral connection to our own existence. Without it, the Dreadnought begins to feel abstracted from his own reality. His chassis can be damaged, systems can fail, but none of it touches him in the way that injury to a flesh and blood body would. He becomes divorced from the consequences of combat in a way that no regular Space Marine ever is. And perhaps most disturbing of all is the transformation of time perception. Human consciousness experiences time as a continuous flow, each moment leading seamlessly into the next. Memory provides continuity, linking past experiences to present reality and allowing the anticipation of future possibilities. But for the Dreadnought, time becomes fragmented. The periods of stasis create gaps in his experience, voids where consciousness simply ceases. When he awakens, there is no sense of duration for the time he was inactive. He went to sleep after one battle and woke for another, and the years or decades or centuries between exist only as abstract knowledge, not as lived experience. His personal timeline becomes a series of disconnected moments, battles and awakenings with emptiness between them. The continuous narrative of self that most conscious beings take for granted is shattered, replaced by a discontinuous existence that makes it increasingly difficult to maintain a coherent sense of identity. For some warriors, the shock of this first awakening is too much. Their minds rebel against the invasion of mechanical sensation. They thrash inside the sarcophagus, though the fluid and the constraints prevent any real movement. They scream, though no sound emerges. Their consciousness fractures under the strain, and they slip into a catatonic state from which they may never emerge.
You know, as I was researching this topic, I found myself thinking about what I would choose if I were in that position. Would I want to continue serving, even in that state? Or would I prefer a clean death on the battlefield? I think that's what makes Dreadnoughts so compelling to me. They represent this uncomfortable question we don't like to ask. Is existence always preferable to non-existence? The Imperium says yes, always serve, always endure. But when I read about warriors like Bjorn who've been conscious for 10,000 years, watching everyone they knew turn to dust, I'm honestly not sure anymore. It's easy to say, I choose to fight forever, when you're imagining glory and purpose. It's harder when you consider the actual cost, the isolation, the fading memories, becoming a stranger to yourself. That tension between duty and mercy is what drew me to make this video. Anyway, let's continue.
These are the failures, the warriors who could not adapt to their new existence. Their sarcophagi are removed from the Dreadnought chassis, and they are allowed to die quietly, their gene seed harvested, and their names added to the rolls of the honored dead. But for those who survive this initial trauma, who manage to hold on to their sense of self, even as everything that defined that self is stripped away, there comes a gradual adjustment. The brain, that miraculous organ capable of adaptation beyond measure, begins to learn the new language of sensation. The Auspex readouts become comprehensible, translating into something that resembles sight. The pressure sensors and gyroscopes feed information that the brain interprets as proprioception, the sense of where the body, even this metal body, exists in space. The warrior learns to move the Dreadnought, to walk without stumbling, to aim the weapons with precision, to fight as he once fought when he possessed a body of flesh and bone. But even this adaptation comes at a cost, because the human brain was not designed to interface with a machine. It was designed to process input from human senses and to control a human body. And when it is forced to do something else, when it is compelled to interpret machine data and control mechanical limbs, something has to give. The parts of the brain responsible for processing human sensation, for remembering what it felt like to touch and taste and smell, these parts begin to atrophy, not in the physical sense perhaps, but in their function. The memories stored there start to fade because they are no longer being reinforced by new sensory input. The warrior begins to forget what food tasted like, what skin felt like, what the scent of flowers or incense or promethium was. These memories become abstractions, intellectual knowledge rather than lived experience. And this is just the beginning, because the true horror of Dreadnought existence is not the initial entombment, traumatic though that is. The true horror is what comes after, in the long years and centuries that follow. It is the slow erasure of everything that made the warrior who he was, the gradual transformation from person to weapon, from individual to artifact. It is the discovery that the life he has been given is not life at all, but a different kind of death, drawn out across spans of time, that make a natural human lifetime seem like a brief flicker. When the entombment is complete, when the warrior has been successfully integrated with his Dreadnought chassis and has demonstrated the ability to control it effectively, there is a ceremony. The Dreadnought is presented to the chapter, and the warrior within is given a new name. Not the name he bore as a flesh-and-blood space marine, though that name may be incorporated into the new designation, but a name that reflects his new status. Ancient is a common prefix. Venerable, for those who have served with particular distinction. The specific names vary by chapter and by the preferences of the warrior himself, if he is still capable of expressing such preferences. The name is inscribed on a scroll that is affixed to the Dreadnought's chassis, visible to all who look upon it. "This is who I was," the scroll proclaims. "This is who I am now." The newly awakened Dreadnought is deployed in battle, because that is what Dreadnoughts are for. They do not serve in administrative capacities. They do not teach the initiates or counsel the chapter's leadership, except in the most limited sense. They are weapons, and weapons exist to be used. So the Dreadnought marches to war alongside his battle brothers, his massive frame towering over them, his weapons speaking with a voice of thunder. He crushes enemy formations beneath his feet. He tears through fortifications with his power fist. He rains death from above with missiles and shells. And for those brief hours of combat, he feels something approaching his old purpose. He is a space marine again, fighting for the Emperor and the Imperium. He is fulfilling his function. But battles end. Victories are achieved, or defeats are acknowledged. The enemy is driven back, or the position is abandoned. And when the fighting stops, when the last shots are fired and the last bodies are counted, the Dreadnought faces a different kind of ordeal, because he cannot simply return to the chapter's fortress monastery and resume a normal existence. He has no normal existence to return to. He cannot eat in the Great Hall with his brothers. He cannot train in the practice cages. He cannot maintain his equipment because he is his equipment. He cannot sleep in a barracks or meditate in a chapel designed for beings of human scale. He is too large, too heavy, too fundamentally different from what he once was. And so, when the Dreadnought is not actively needed for combat, he is returned to the deep halls of the fortress monastery. These halls are sacred spaces, chapel-like chambers where the Dreadnoughts of the chapter are kept when they are not at war. The chamber is usually vast and echoing, with a cathedral quality to its architecture. Alcoves line the walls, each one designed to house a Dreadnought sarcophagus. Some of these alcoves are occupied, their inhabitants waiting in the darkness for the call to war. Others stand empty, monuments to Dreadnoughts, who have fallen in battle or who have finally been granted the mercy of true death. The Dreadnought is positioned in his alcove, and the tech priests begin the process of putting him into stasis. This is not sleep in any natural sense. It is a forced shutdown of consciousness, achieved through a combination of neural inhibitors and the gradual reduction of life support function to its absolute minimum. The warrior inside the sarcophagus feels it happening. He feels his thoughts growing sluggish, his awareness dimming. It is like drowning in slow motion, sinking down into a darkness that is deeper than any he has known. And then, at some point that he cannot identify, consciousness ceases. Not death, because his brain still functions at some minimal level. Not sleep, because there are no dreams, no REM cycles, no processing of memories. Just nothing. A void. An absence of being that continues for however long the chapter decides he is not needed. When the Dreadnought is awakened, it is because there is a war that requires his presence. A threat has emerged that the chapter's current forces cannot handle alone. An enemy has appeared that requires the wisdom and firepower of the ancients. The tech priests reverse the stasis process, flooding the sarcophagus with stimulants and reactivating the neural pathways that had been suppressed. And the warrior inside begins the long, disorienting process of returning to consciousness. The first moments of awakening are confusion. The warrior does not remember going into stasis. The shutdown was too gradual, the transition to unconsciousness too smooth for there to be a clear memory of the moment it occurred. So when awareness returns, there is no sense of continuity, no feeling of having slept and then awakened. There is only the jarring transition from non-existence to existence, from void to sensation. The Dreadnought systems come online one by one. Auspec's readouts flicker into his consciousness. Weapon systems report their status. And then comes the question that every awakening Dreadnought asks, either aloud through his Vox speakers or silently in the privacy of his own thoughts. How long? Sometimes the answer is days. The Dreadnought was put into stasis after one battle and is being awakened for another battle in the same campaign. He has lost a handful of days, a week at most. This is manageable. The disorientation is minimal. The world he returns to is recognizably the same one he left. His battle brothers are the same warriors he fought alongside before. The war continues as it did. But sometimes, the answer is decades. The Dreadnought was put into stasis after a campaign that ended, and he is being awakened because a new threat has emerged a generation later. The Space Marines who surrounded him when he went to sleep are gone now. Dead in battles he never witnessed or promoted to positions where they no longer serve on the front lines. The young initiates who looked up at him with awe are now grizzled veterans, if they survived at all. The chapter's leadership has changed. The Fortress Monastery shows signs of modification and repair, evidence of conflicts that occurred while he slumbered. And the Dreadnought must adjust to this, must accept that he has lost years of his chapter's history, must forge new connections with warriors he does not know. And sometimes, more rarely but with increasing frequency as the Dreadnought ages, the answer is centuries. The warrior went into stasis after a campaign in M41, and he is being awakened in M42. The galaxy itself has changed. The Great Rift has torn reality in half. Primaris Space Marines, a new breed of Astartes, now fight alongside the traditional warriors. Entire chapters that existed when the Dreadnought went to sleep have been declared extinct. New enemies have emerged. Old enemies have evolved new strategies. And the Dreadnought must cope with the knowledge that he has slept through centuries of history, that everyone he knew is dust, that he is a relic from an age that no longer exists. This is the true nature of Dreadnought existence. It is not a continuous life, but a series of brief awakenings separated by vast gulfs of unconscious time. The warrior inside experiences his existence as a discontinuous thing, a collection of moments with no connecting thread between them. He fights a battle, then sleeps, then awakens to fight another battle in a world that has moved on without him. His subjective experience might encompass only a few years of actual conscious time, but the objective time that has passed might be measured in centuries or millennia. And each awakening brings with it a terrible realization. More has been lost. The memories that seemed so vivid after the last awakening are hazier now. The faces that he could recall with perfect clarity have become indistinct. The names that were on the tip of his tongue have slipped away. The warrior finds himself struggling to remember details that should be fundamental to his identity. What color were his own eyes before they were replaced by optical sensors? What did his voice sound like before it became the mechanical rasp of Vox speakers? Did he have family before he was taken by the chapter as a child? Did he have friends among his battle brothers? And if so, what were their names? This erosion of memory is not merely the natural forgetting that comes with the passage of time. It is accelerated by the very nature of Dreadnought existence. The human brain consolidates memories during sleep, processing the day's experiences and storing them in long-term memory through complex neurochemical processes. But the stasis that a Dreadnought experiences is not sleep. It is closer to suspended animation, a state in which brain activity is reduced to the absolute minimum necessary to sustain the basic functions of life. The consolidation processes that should occur during sleep do not happen during stasis. The memories of the last awakening are not properly stored, and so when the next awakening comes, they have begun to degrade. Moreover, the brain's capacity to form new memories depends on the formation of new neural connections, the strengthening of synaptic pathways through repetition, and emotional significance. But a dreadnought's brain, connected to the machine through the mind impulse unit, is not forming the same kinds of connections it would in a human body. The sensory input is alien. The motor commands are routed through mechanical systems rather than organic muscles. The emotional experiences are filtered through the strange remove of mechanical existence. And so the neural pathways that would normally encode memories begin to weaken, to atrophy, to be replaced by the pathways needed to operate the Dreadnought chassis. The result is a gradual but inexorable loss of self. The warrior who was once a person with a history, with preferences and quirks and a unique personality, becomes something less distinct. He remembers that he had these things, but the specific details fade. He knows that he once enjoyed the taste of certain foods, but he cannot recall what those foods tasted like. He remembers that he had a favorite weapon when he fought as a regular space marine, but he cannot remember why he preferred it over others. He recalls that he earned certain honors and distinctions, but the battles in which he earned them blur together into a generic memory of conflict. And as the personal memories fade, what remains are the tactical ones. The brain, still sharp and capable in its analytical functions, retains the information necessary for war. The Dreadnought remembers how to fight, how to command, how to analyze a battlefield and identify the crucial points that will determine victory or defeat. He remembers the enemies he has faced, their strengths and weaknesses, the strategies that proved effective against them. He becomes, increasingly, a repository of military knowledge rather than a person. A database of warfare. A weapon that thinks but feels less and less with each passing century. Some dreadnoughts fight against this erosion. They consciously work to preserve their memories, rehearsing them in the brief periods of awakening, clinging to the details like drowning men clutching debris. They tell stories of their past to anyone who will listen, hoping that the act of narration will reinforce the neural pathways that hold those memories. They demand to be awakened more frequently, arguing that they can better serve the chapter if they are not allowed to sleep for decades at a time. But the chapter rarely agrees to such requests. Dreadnoughts are valuable assets, yes, but they are also temperamental and difficult to maintain. The neural stress of extended operation can lead to system failures, to the very madness that the stasis periods are designed to prevent. And so the Dreadnought is put back to sleep, his protests noted but ultimately ignored. Other Dreadnoughts embrace the forgetting. They see it as a mercy, a gradual release from the burden of being human. If they must exist in this mechanical form for centuries or millennia, perhaps it is better not to remember what it was like to be anything else. Perhaps the loss of memory is not a tragedy, but a necessary adaptation, the price of becoming what they must be in order to continue serving. These dreadnoughts speak less and less as the centuries pass. They respond to orders and carry out missions, but they do not engage in conversation. They do not share their wisdom with the younger warriors. They become silent, their personalities receding until all that remains is the function. They are weapons, and weapons need not remember. But whether they fight the forgetting or embrace it, all dreadnoughts experience it. And with the loss of memory comes a deeper change, one that is perhaps even more profound. They begin to lose their sense of connection to the living. The Space Marines who fight alongside them are strangers, warriors from a different era whose concerns and customs feel alien. The chapter itself, though it bears the same name and insignia as the one the Dreadnought once knew, has evolved in ways that make it feel unfamiliar. New traditions have emerged. Old rituals have been modified or abandoned. The very language of the chapter, the ways in which the warriors speak to one another and address their superiors, has shifted subtly but significantly. The Dreadnought finds himself isolated not just physically, sealed within his sarcophagus, but temporally and socially as well. He is a ghost from the past, haunting a present that has no place for him except on the battlefield. When he speaks, The younger warriors listen with respect, but they do not understand him, not really. The wars he remembers are ancient history to them. The enemies he faced have been replaced by new threats. The chapter's priorities have shifted. And thus, Dreadnought, for all his centuries of experience, finds that his advice is often ignored or politely acknowledged, and then set aside in favor of more contemporary approaches. This isolation is compounded by the simple fact that the Dreadnought cannot participate in the daily life of the chapter. He cannot join his battle brothers in the Great Hall for the evening meal, sharing stories and strengthening the bonds of brotherhood. He cannot train alongside the scouts, passing on his skills through direct instruction. He cannot attend the chapter's councils, except as a silent, looming presence, his massive form too large to fit comfortably in chambers designed for warriors of human scale. He is apart from the community he once belonged to, and each awakening makes that separation more pronounced. And then there is the burden of immortality itself. To be a Dreadnought is to outlive everyone. Every friend you make will die while you sleep. Every warrior you respect will fall in battle or succumb to age or be claimed by some other fate. Every generation of Space Marines that you fight alongside will be replaced by a new generation, and then another, and another, until the names and faces blur together into an endless procession of the doomed. Consider Bjorn, the Fell-Handed, the oldest Dreadnought still in service to the Imperium. He fought alongside Leman Russ during the Great Crusade over 10,000 years ago. He witnessed the Emperor himself, walked among the Primarchs when they were still whole and loyal. He fought in the burning of Prospero, where his chapter made war upon their brother Legion. He was there when Leman Russ disappeared into the Eye of Terror, never to return. Every Space Marine who was alive when Bjorn was entombed in his Dreadnought chassis is long dead. Every fortress world that existed then has been lost and reclaimed, and lost again. Entire chapters have risen and fallen in the time Bjorn has served. The Imperium itself has changed beyond recognition, from the hopeful expansion of the Great Crusade to the desperate stagnation of the 41st Millennium and beyond. What must it be like for Bjorn when he awakens? To emerge from stasis and find that another century has passed, that the galaxy has changed yet again in ways he could not have predicted. Does he remember what the Emperor looked like after all these millennia? Or has that memory faded too, leaving only the knowledge that he once stood in the presence of humanity's master? Does he still feel the pain of Leman Russ's disappearance? Or has that grief been dulled by the passage of 10,000 years, worn smooth like a stone in a river? Does he care about the current state of his chapter? Or has he learned to maintain a kind of emotional distance, knowing that whatever bonds he forms will be severed by his next period of stasis? The lore suggests that Bjorn maintains his clarity better than most, that his will is strong enough to resist the erosion that claims other Dreadnoughts. He is awakened once every century to hold court at the Great Feast, where he recounts elements of his saga to his battle brothers, keeping alive the oral traditions of the Space Wolves. But even Bjorn admits, in those rare moments when he speaks honestly about his existence, that the loneliness cuts deeper than any blade. He is the last of the company of Russ. Everyone else who walked with the Primarch is gone. He alone remains, a living link to an age of legends. And that link is also a chain that binds him to a world that no longer exists. But Bjorn is not the only Dreadnought whose story deserves attention. Across the Imperium, in dozens of chapters, there are other ancient warriors whose experiences illuminate different aspects of Dreadnought existence. Consider Bray Arth Ashmantle of the Salamanders, an ironclad Dreadnought who has served his chapter for centuries. Where Bjorn represents the possibility of maintaining sanity and purpose across impossible spans of time, Brayath represents something different, the transformation of personality that comes with Dreadnought existence. Before his entombment, he was known for his compassion and his dedication to protecting civilians, values that the salamanders hold sacred. But centuries of awakening only for war have changed him. He is still loyal, still effective, still dedicated to the chapter's mission. But the compassion has faded, replaced by a cold, tactical pragmatism that would have been foreign to his former self. When Brearth speaks, younger salamanders sometimes note that his words lack the warmth and humanity that define their chapter's culture. He discusses civilian casualties as acceptable losses if they serve a strategic objective. He advocates for total war measures that prioritize victory over the preservation of life. This is not because he has become cruel or because he no longer cares about the chapter's values. It is because his lived experience has become so divorced from civilian existence that he can no longer truly connect with it. He remembers intellectually that the salamanders are supposed to protect the innocent, but that knowledge is abstract now, a rule to be followed rather than a value deeply felt. The emotional resonance has been lost, eroded by centuries of experiencing the world only through the filter of mechanical senses and only in the context of combat. Then there is ancient Rylanor of the Emperor's Children, a dreadnought whose story is perhaps the most tragic of all. Entombed during the Horus Heresy, Rylanor remained loyal to the Emperor even as his legion fell to chaos. For 10,000 years, he waited on the plague-ridden world where his legion had abandoned him, conscious throughout most of that time, experiencing every moment of isolation and decay. When he was finally discovered, it was not by loyal Imperial forces, but by members of his fallen legion, now servants of Slaanesh. They offered him a chance to join them, to escape his tomb and embrace the power of the ruinous powers. Rylanor's response was to detonate a virus bomb he had been guarding for millennia, choosing death and taking his corruptors with him, rather than accept any existence that required him to betray his oaths. Rylanor's story illustrates something crucial about Dreadnought psychology, the way that extended isolation can solidify purpose into something unshakable. For 10,000 years, Rylanor had nothing but his loyalty and his hatred of traitors to sustain him. Every other aspect of his personality, every memory of his life before the heresy, all of it faded away until only that core purpose remained. He was not a person anymore in any meaningful sense. He was a function. Remain loyal, resist chaos, destroy traitors. And when the opportunity came to fulfill that function, he did so without hesitation, even though it meant his own destruction. There was nothing left of ancient Rylanor except the oath he had sworn, and when that oath had been kept, there was no reason to continue existing. The story of Tancred of the Black Templars offers yet another perspective. Tancred, known as Endures for his stubborn refusal to yield in battle, has been a dreadnought for so long that the circumstances of his original entombment have been lost to history. What remains are fragments of memory and a will so powerful that it has sustained him through countless campaigns. But Tancred's endurance comes at a cost. His mind is fragmenting, his memories jumbling together until he can no longer reliably distinguish between past battles and present ones. He speaks to warriors who have been dead for centuries as if they were standing beside him. He issues tactical commands for battles that were fought millennia ago. And yet, despite this deterioration, his combat effectiveness remains undiminished. His body may be mechanical, and his mind may be breaking, but his purpose endures. He fights, because that is what he has always done, and all he knows how to do. The Ultramarines Ultrasius, interred after suffering catastrophic damage during the Tyrannic Wars, represents a different kind of tragedy. Ultrasius was a captain known for his tactical genius and his ability to inspire his brothers through eloquent speeches and personal charisma. These qualities did not survive his entombment. The damage to his brain, combined with the neural stress of the mind impulse unit, has impaired his ability to speak coherently. He can still think tactically, can still analyze battlefields and develop strategies, but he struggles to communicate these insights to others. His Vox speakers produce garbled, fragmented sentences that his battle brothers must struggle to interpret. The brilliant orator has been reduced to halting, painful speech, and the frustration of knowing what he wants to say, but being unable to articulate it, has become another source of torment. For some dreadnoughts, the physical characteristics of their particular chassis add unique elements of suffering. The Leviathan pattern dreadnoughts, massive siege engines that mount devastating weapons, place such enormous strain on their pilots that prolonged operation causes hallucinations and delusions. Leviathan pilots report experiencing vivid flashbacks to past battles, sometimes becoming convinced that they are still fighting in wars that ended centuries ago. They speak of seeing fallen enemies rising to attack them again, of hearing voices of the dead calling out in the chaos of combat. The neural load required to control these massive machines is simply too great for organic minds to sustain without consequence. And the consequence is a slow descent into a fugue state where reality and memory become indistinguishable. The chaplain dreadnoughts, warriors who served as spiritual leaders before their entombment, face their own unique challenges. They continue to perform their duties, leading prayers and maintaining the chapter's faith, but the separation from their brothers makes these roles increasingly difficult. A chaplain's work depends on human connection, on the ability to counsel warriors who are struggling with doubt or trauma, on the personal relationships that allow spiritual guidance to be effective. But how can a dreadnought truly counsel a regular space marine? How can he offer comfort when he himself is trapped in a state of constant suffering? How can he speak of the Emperor's mercy when his own existence is proof that mercy is in short supply? Some chaplain dreadnoughts maintain their faith and continue their work as best they can. Others become hollow recitations of doctrine, their words technically correct, but devoid of the conviction that should animate them. And then there are the dreadnoughts who have been destroyed and resurrected, warriors whose sarcophagi were recovered from fallen chassis and transferred to new dreadnought bodies. For these warriors, the experience is particularly traumatic. They remember the destruction of their previous chassis, the terror of being unable to move or defend themselves as the armor around them was breached. Some remember the moments before consciousness failed, the awareness that this might finally be true death. And then they awakened again, in a new body that was mechanically identical to the old one, but somehow felt different. The process of adapting to a new chassis, of learning its particular quirks, and calibrating the neural interface all over again, is exhausting. And it raises the philosophical question: if the sarcophagus can be moved from one chassis to another, what exactly is the dreadnought? Is it the warrior inside, or is it the machine? If every part of the machine can be replaced, is the warrior still the same being he was, or has he become something new? The ironclad dreadnoughts, designed for close combat and siege warfare, illustrate how tactical role shapes dreadnought psychology. An ironclad is built to charge into the heart of enemy formations, to breach fortifications through sheer force, to fight in situations where the risk of destruction is highest. The pilots of these machines must cultivate a particular mindset, a willingness to throw themselves into danger that borders on suicidal. Some ironclad pilots develop what can only be described as a death wish, a desire to finally be destroyed that they sublimate into increasingly reckless combat behavior. They are the first to charge, the last to retreat, the ones who volunteer for the missions with the lowest probability of survival. And yet they endure, their chassis proving more resilient than their psychology, forcing them to continue existing even as they long for the peace of true death. For other dreadnoughts, the burden proves too heavy. The psychological toll of immortality, combined with the isolation and the loss of self, breaks them. They descend into madness, their minds fragmenting under the weight of centuries. Some become catatonic, their consciousness retreating so far inward that they can no longer respond to external stimuli. They must be forcibly awakened, their neural system stimulated with ever-increasing intensity just to achieve basic function. Others become aggressive, their rage and pain manifesting as indiscriminate violence that makes them dangerous even to their own battle brothers. The most extreme case of this madness is embodied in Murderfang, another dreadnought of the Space Wolves, where Bjorn represents the possibility of maintaining sanity across millennia. Murderfang represents its opposite. Driven completely feral by the isolation and trauma of dreadnought existence, Murderfang has descended into a state of uncontrollable fury. The chapter awakens him only when they need pure, unthinking violence, when they face an enemy that requires the application of overwhelming force without regard for tactics or collateral damage. Murderfang is unleashed upon the battlefield, and he kills everything in his path with a savage abandon that makes even other space wolves wary. And then, when the battle is over, he is immediately returned to stasis before he can turn his rage upon his own brothers. Murderfang is kept in his alcove under heavy guard. His sarcophagus is shackled with blessed chains, as if the mere metal of his chassis were a beast that must be restrained. When he is awakened, the tech priests who attend him do so with extreme caution, ready to shut him down again at the first sign that his madness is turning inward toward the chapter. He is, in effect, a weapon of last resort, a living example of what happens when the psychological pressures of dreadnought existence are allowed to run their course without intervention. But even dreadnoughts, who do not descend into Murderfang's state of feral madness, experience psychological decline. Extended neural interface with a machine as large and complex as a dreadnought causes immense mental stress. The human brain was not designed to control something of that scale, to process sensory input from systems so divorced from organic perception. Over time, this stress manifests in various ways. Lethargy becomes common, the dreadnought's responses growing slower and less precise. Confusion sets in, the warrior struggling to distinguish between current events and memories of past battles. Some dreadnoughts develop a condition known as dyschronometria, losing their ability to accurately perceive the passage of time. Hours feel like days. Decades feel like moments. The linear progression of cause and effect becomes muddled, and the dreadnought may speak as if events from different centuries all happened in the same campaign. Senility is not uncommon among the oldest dreadnoughts. Their minds, worn down by the constant strain of operating mechanical systems and the repeated cycles of stasis and awakening, begin to fail in the same way that an aged human brain might fail. They forget orders they were given moments ago. They call out for battle brothers who have been dead for centuries. They become fixated on details from past battles, unable to let go of old grievances or past failures. The chapter's librarians and chaplains work to manage these cases, providing whatever psychological support they can, but there is only so much they can do. The decline is often irreversible, and the only question is whether the dreadnought will retain enough function to continue serving, or whether he will finally be granted the mercy of deactivation. And then there are the dreams, or rather, the absence of them. Sleep, for human beings and for space marines in their natural state, involves cycles of REM sleep during which dreams occur. Dreams serve important psychological functions, processing emotions, consolidating memories, working through trauma. But the stasis that dreadnoughts experience is not sleep. It does not include REM cycles. There are no dreams. And the absence of dreams, extended over centuries, has its own psychological consequences. Some dreadnoughts report experiencing something during their stasis periods, though whether these are true dreams or some artifact of the neural shutdown process is unclear. They describe a state of half-lucid limbo where memories of war and death churn endlessly, fragments of past battles replaying themselves in distorted form. They speak of being trapped in a space where time has no meaning, where they are simultaneously present in every battle they have ever fought and present in none of them. They describe voices of the long dead calling to them, though whether these are hallucinations or genuine psychic phenomena in a universe where such things exist is difficult to determine. Other dreadnoughts report experiencing nothing at all during stasis, and they find this even more disturbing. To go to sleep and wake with no sense that any time has passed, to have centuries vanish in what feels like an instant, creates a profound sense of discontinuity. The dreadnought begins to question whether the periods of stasis are real, whether he truly exists during those times, or whether he simply ceases to be and is recreated each time he is awakened. These are not questions that have comfortable answers, and dreadnoughts who dwell on them too deeply often find themselves spiraling into existential crises that further damage their already fragile psychological state. The Adeptus Mechanicus, those tech priests who maintain the dreadnoughts and oversee their construction, are aware of these psychological issues. But their response is not compassion or an attempt to address the underlying problem. Instead, they simply view the mental decline of dreadnought pilots as an inevitable consequence of the technology, something to be managed rather than prevented. When a dreadnought's mind begins to fail, the tech priests adjust his stasis cycles, keeping him unconscious for longer periods to slow the progression of symptoms. They modify the neural interface settings, attempting to reduce the stress on his brain. In extreme cases, they may perform psychosurgery, carefully excising damaged portions of the brain and replacing them with cogitator systems that can perform the same functions mechanically. But these interventions only delay the inevitable. Every dreadnought, if he serves long enough, will eventually reach a point where his mind can no longer sustain the burden of his existence. And when that point comes, the chapter must decide whether to continue using him in his diminished state or to finally grant him the peace of true death. It is a decision made coldly, based on calculations of utility rather than mercy. Can this dreadnought still fight effectively? Can he follow orders? Does the tactical value he provides outweigh the risk that his madness poses? If the answer is yes, he continues to serve, his deteriorating mind a price the chapter is willing to pay for his continued effectiveness. If the answer is no, his sarcophagus is deactivated. His gene seed is harvested if it remains viable, and his remains are interred in the chapter's halls of remembrance, alongside the other honored dead. The different patterns of dreadnought each bring their own unique torments. The standard Castroferum pattern, the most common design in use by Space Marine chapters, is considered relatively stable. The technology is ancient and well understood, the neural interfaces are reliable, and the life support systems can sustain a pilot for millennia if properly maintained. But stable is a relative term. The Castroferum is still a prison, still a source of psychological stress, still a machine that demands more from its pilot than any human mind was meant to give. The Contemptor pattern, dating back to the time of the Horus Heresy, represents an earlier and in some ways superior design. Contemptors are more agile than Castroferums, capable of more fluid movement, and equipped with advanced atomantic shielding that provides better protection. But they are also exceedingly rare, the knowledge of their construction lost during the heresy. Each Contemptor is a priceless relic, jealously guarded by the few chapters that possess them. And the pilots of Contemptors, aware of their status as living relics piloting irreplaceable machines, feel an additional burden of expectation. They cannot afford to fail because their dreadnought cannot be replaced. This psychological pressure, added to all the other stresses of dreadnought existence, makes Contemptor pilots particularly vulnerable to mental strain. Then there is the Redemptor pattern, a recent innovation associated with the Primaris Space Marines. Redemptors are larger and more powerful than traditional dreadnoughts, mounting heavier weapons and equipped with more sophisticated neural links. These advanced neural systems allow the pilot to control the Redemptor with surprising dexterity and speed, operating the massive war machine almost as smoothly as he would his own body. But this increased integration comes at a terrible cost. The Redemptor's systems burn through their pilots at an accelerated rate. The intensity of the neural interface, the power demands of the hyperdense reactors that fuel the machine, and the sheer amount of sensory data that the pilot must process all combine to create a level of stress that is unsustainable over extended periods. Many Redemptors that have seen sustained combat have already required the replacement of their sarcophagi. The original pilots literally burned out by the strain of operating such powerful machines. In some cases, the Dreadnought's surging energies leach the pilot's life force directly, reducing him to nothing more than a blackened husk of organs that must be removed and given a true burial. The Redemptor represents a philosophical shift in the Imperium's approach to Dreadnoughts, where traditional patterns were designed to preserve veteran warriors for as long as possible, extending their service across centuries or millennia. The Redemptor treats the pilot as a consumable resource. The machine's power and effectiveness are prioritized over the longevity of the consciousness operating it. This reflects the desperate state of the Imperium in the wake of the Great Rift, where immediate combat effectiveness is valued more highly than the long-term preservation of wisdom. But it also reveals a darker truth. The Mechanicus tech priests who designed the Redemptor spared little thought to the health of the incumbent, seeing him as little more than another part to be interred or replaced as necessary. The pilot is not a person to be preserved, but a component to be used until it fails. And then, on the other side of the great divide between loyalist and traitor, there are the Chaos Dreadnoughts, known as Hellbrutes when they have been corrupted by the warp. If loyalist Dreadnought existence is a kind of hell, Hellbrute existence is that hell magnified and made worse by the malevolent influence of the ruinous powers. The process of creating a Hellbrute is not presented as an honor. It is, explicitly and openly, a punishment. A Chaos Space Marine who has failed his warband, who has displeased his lord, who has simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, may find himself seized and forcibly entombed in a Hellbrute chassis. There is no ceremony, no reverence, only the brutal efficiency of the dark mechanicum forcing a consciousness into a prison from which it can never escape. The entombment process for a Hellbrute is even more traumatic than that of a loyalist dreadnought. Tentacles of unknown origin burrow into the victim's flesh, merging with his nervous system in a way that is agonizing and invasive. The pilot is not placed gently into amniotic fluid, but rather absorbed into the machine, his body beginning to fuse with the metal itself. Over time, the boundary between flesh and machine blurs and then disappears entirely. The pilot becomes part of the Hellbrute in a way that goes beyond neural interface. His consciousness is trapped not just in a sarcophagus, but in the metal of the chassis itself, unable to distinguish where he ends and the machine begins. And unlike loyalist dreadnoughts, which are placed in stasis between battles to preserve their pilot's sanity, Hellbrutes are often left active during peacetime. They are chained in place, shackled in the depths of chaos ships or fortresses, and they remain conscious throughout their captivity. They experience every moment of their imprisonment, feeling the passage of time with excruciating clarity. The madness that comes to loyalist dreadnoughts after centuries of cycles of awakening and stasis comes to Hellbrutes in a matter of days or weeks. They rage against their chains, scream invective at their captors, beg for release or death with equal desperation. And when they are finally unleashed on the battlefield, their fury is directed at everything in their path, friend and foe alike, because the only release they know is violence. Some Hellbrutes retain enough sanity to function as tactical assets, following orders and working in coordination with other chaos forces. But even these more stable examples are fundamentally broken, their personalities warped by the combination of forced entombment and exposure to warp energies. They speak in voices that are layered with static and impossible harmonics, the words of the pilot mixing with the whispers of demons that have taken residence in the machine systems. They exhibit behaviors that suggest the presence of multiple consciousnesses within a single chassis, the original pilot now sharing his prison with entities from the Imperium. And then there are the Hellbrutes that have welcomed their destruction. These are the ones who have been entombed the longest, who have endured decades or centuries of madness and fusion with their mechanical shells. They no longer seek escape. They seek only ending. When they are deployed in battle, they fight with a desperate abandon, throwing themselves at the enemy's strongest forces in the hope that they will finally be destroyed. Their vox speakers emit continuous streams of screaming, cursing, pleading for death. And on those rare occasions when they are granted their wish, when an enemy's firepower finally breaches their armor and destroys the sarcophagus within, there is a moment of silence before the machine falls. A pause that might, if one were generous, be interpreted as relief. The contrast between how Loyalist chapters and Chaos warbands present Dreadnought entombment is striking. Loyalist chapters wrap the practice in language of honor and sacred duty. They present it as a privilege, a chance for a fallen warrior to continue serving the Emperor beyond death. The ceremonies are solemn and reverent. The battle brothers who witness an entombment are told that their brother is being elevated, transformed into something greater than he was. And to some extent, this narrative serves a purpose. It maintains morale. It reinforces the chapter's values of eternal service and sacrifice. It gives the younger warriors something to aspire to, a vision of service that extends even beyond the mortal span. But the Chaos warbands have no need for such pretense. They acknowledge Dreadnought entombment for what it truly is, a horror inflicted upon the individual for the benefit of the collective. A Chaos Lord who orders a warrior to be interred in a hellbrute does not claim to be honoring that warrior. He is punishing him, disposing of him, or simply using him as a resource to be exploited. There is a brutal honesty to this approach that, perversely, makes it easier to understand than the Loyalists' rhetoric of honor. And yet, even among the Loyalists, there are hints that the truth is understood, even if it is rarely spoken aloud. The very fact that dreadnoughts are kept in stasis as much as possible suggests an awareness of the psychological toll their existence takes. If it were truly an honor, if the dreadnoughts genuinely embraced their new existence, would the chapters not keep them active and engaged? Would they not seek the counsel of these ancient warriors on a regular basis, valuing their wisdom and experience? Instead, the dreadnoughts are awakened only when necessary, when their firepower and tactical knowledge are required. The rest of the time, they sleep, and the chapter tells itself that this sleep is for the dreadnoughts' benefit, to preserve them from the ravages of time. But perhaps it is also for the benefit of the living, who find the presence of these walking tombs unsettling, who prefer not to confront the reality of what their chapter does to its greatest heroes. There are Space Marines who have refused Dreadnought entombment, though such refusals are rarely acknowledged in official chapter records. A warrior who knows he is dying, who understands what awaits him if he is chosen for entombment, may use the last of his strength to ensure that his injuries are fatal beyond any possibility of preservation. He may destroy his own brain, ensuring that there is nothing left to entomb. He may request that his battle brothers grant him the Emperor's peace, a quick death rather than the slow horror of mechanical existence. Such requests place the warrior's brothers in a difficult position, for to honor the request is to deprive the chapter of a valuable asset, but to refuse it is to condemn their brother to a fate he explicitly rejects. The official doctrine of most chapters is that refusal is not an option. When a warrior is selected for Dreadnought entombment, it is because the chapter has deemed his continued service necessary. His personal preferences are irrelevant in the face of that necessity. The needs of the many outweigh the desires of the one. This is the logic of the Imperium, the cold calculus that justifies every atrocity and every sacrifice. And so the warrior is entombed whether he wishes it or not. And if he protests, those protests are noted in his records and then ignored. But there are chapters that take a different approach. Some allow their warriors the dignity of choice, presenting Dreadnought entombment as an offer rather than a command. The warrior is told what awaits him if he accepts, given as honest an accounting as the chapter is capable of providing, and then allowed to decide for himself whether he wishes to continue. Those who accept are honored for their choice. Those who refuse are granted a warrior's death, and their gene seed is harvested for the next generation. These chapters argue that a dreadnought who has chosen his fate will be more stable, more effective, more able to resist the psychological pressures of his existence because he entered it willingly rather than being forced. Whether this proves true in practice is difficult to determine. The psychological trajectory of dreadnought pilots seems to follow similar patterns, regardless of whether they volunteered or were conscripted. The isolation, the memory loss, the gradual erosion of self, these things happen regardless of the pilot's initial willingness. Perhaps choice provides some small measure of comfort in the early years, a sense of agency that makes the burden slightly easier to bear. But over the centuries, as the memories of that choice fade along with all other memories, even that small comfort is lost. And what of the dreadnoughts themselves? What do they say about their existence in those rare moments when they are willing to speak honestly? The accounts vary, but certain themes recur across different sources. Many speak of the loneliness, the sense of being fundamentally separated from the living, even when surrounded by battle brothers. They describe feeling like ghosts haunting their own chapters, present but not truly part of the community they once belonged to. They speak of the frustration of trying to communicate with warriors who cannot understand the weight of centuries, who see battles as discrete events rather than part of an endless continuum. The relationship between a dreadnought and his chapter is complex and often troubled. The chapter honors the dreadnought as a hero, a living monument to valor and sacrifice. His name is spoken with reverence. His deeds are recounted in the chapter's histories. Young initiates are brought to the deep halls where the dreadnoughts slumber, and they are taught to view these ancient warriors as exemplars of everything a space marine should aspire to be. There are ceremonies dedicated to the dreadnoughts, rituals where tech priests anoint their chassis with sacred oils, while chaplains recite prayers of gratitude for their continued service. On the surface, the dreadnoughts are respected and valued members of the chapter, honored elders whose wisdom is sought and whose presence is treasured. But beneath this veneer of reverence lies a more complicated reality. The living space marines, for all their respect and awe, find the dreadnoughts deeply unsettling. These towering machines that speak with dead voices and move with mechanical precision are reminders of what awaits any warrior who suffers catastrophic injury. They are proof that death is not the worst fate that can befall a space marine, that there are states of existence more terrible than a clean ending on the battlefield. The younger warriors look upon the dreadnoughts and feel not just awe, but also a quiet dread, an unspoken fear that they too might one day be sealed within such a prison. This dread creates a subtle but significant distance between the dreadnoughts and their battle brothers. When a dreadnought speaks, the other space marines listen respectfully, but there is a stiffness to their attention that would not be present if they were hearing from a living captain or veteran sergeant. When a dreadnought enters the Great Hall, conversations falter and then resume at a lower volume, as if his presence has cast a pall over the gathering. When a dreadnought offers counsel or shares wisdom from his centuries of experience, his words are acknowledged and filed away, but they rarely seem to influence the chapter's actual decisions. The respect is real, but so is the discomfort, and that discomfort manifests as a kind of polite exclusion. The tech priests who maintain the dreadnoughts form the most consistent relationships with these ancient warriors, but even these connections are fundamentally transactional. The tech priests approach the dreadnoughts not as people, but as sacred machines that happen to contain organic components. Their primary concern is the functioning of the chassis, the integrity of the life support systems, the calibration of the weapons. They perform their duties with meticulous care, chanting the proper prayers and performing the correct rituals. But their focus is on the machine, not the man within it. When they speak to a dreadnought, it is usually to ask diagnostic questions or to inform him of maintenance schedules. They address the warrior by his designation rather than his name, and their manner is that of technicians consulting with a piece of equipment about its own operational status. Some dreadnoughts form relationships with specific tech priests who attend them across multiple awakenings. These relationships can become almost companionable, the dreadnought and the tech priest developing a shared understanding built on centuries of interaction. But even these bonds are limited by the fundamental nature of the dreadnought's existence. The tech priest ages and eventually is replaced by a successor who must begin the relationship anew. The dreadnought endures, outliving generation after generation of maintenance personnel, until the faces blur together and even the names of those who have served him longest fade from memory. The chaplains of the chapter attempt to provide spiritual support to the dreadnoughts, visiting them in their alcoves and leading them in prayers. But this support is often inadequate to the actual psychological needs of the ancient warriors. The chaplains speak of duty and honor, of service to the emperor, and the glory of the chapter. These themes resonate with dreadnoughts in their early years, when the memories of their flesh and blood existence are still relatively fresh. But for the truly ancient dreadnoughts, warriors who have endured for centuries or millennia, such words ring hollow. Duty has become an abstract concept, divorced from any sense of personal meaning. Honor is a word that no longer carries emotional weight. The emperor is a distant figure, if he is remembered at all, and the chapter itself has become a thing apart, an organization that the dreadnought serves but no longer truly belongs to. The librarians, those space marines with psychic powers, sometimes attempt to reach the dreadnoughts on a deeper level, using their abilities to establish mental contact that goes beyond words. These attempts occasionally succeed in providing moments of genuine connection, fleeting instances where the dreadnought feels understood in a way that normal communication never allows. But such contact is also dangerous, because the psyche of a dreadnought who has endured for centuries is often a fragmentary, chaotic thing, and the librarian who establishes a deep connection may find himself exposed to the full weight of the dreadnought's accumulated trauma. More than one librarian has emerged from such contact, shaken, reporting that the interior landscape of a truly ancient dreadnought is a nightmare of endless war and fading memory, a consciousness that has been stretched and distorted until it barely resembles anything human. The chapter's leadership, its master, captain, and senior officers, interact with the dreadnoughts primarily in a command capacity. They awaken specific dreadnoughts for specific missions, choosing which ancient warrior to deploy based on tactical considerations and the particular skills that warrior possessed before his entombment. A dreadnought, who was once a master of siege warfare, is awakened when the chapter must breach a fortification. A dreadnought who fought extensively against chaos forces is called upon when heretics threaten. The selection process is pragmatic, treating the dreadnoughts as tools to be employed rather than warriors with their own preferences and desires. Some chapters make an effort to include their dreadnoughts in strategic planning, awakening them to participate in councils of war where major campaigns are discussed. But these sessions are often frustrating for all involved. The dreadnoughts, whose experience spans centuries and whose perspective encompasses countless battles, see patterns and connections that the living warriors miss. They offer advice based on deep, historical knowledge, drawing parallels to ancient conflicts and warning against strategies that failed in the past. But this advice is frequently ignored or dismissed because the tactical situation has changed since those ancient conflicts, or because the dreadnought's memory of specific details is unreliable, or simply because the living commanders are uncomfortable taking direction from a consciousness trapped in a machine. The other dreadnoughts, those fellow ancient warriors who share the deep halls, become the closest thing to peers that an awakened dreadnought has. When two or more dreadnoughts are awakened for the same campaign, they recognize in each other a shared experience that no living space marine can truly understand. They communicate in a kind of shorthand, trading references to battles fought decades or centuries ago, acknowledging truths about Dreadnought existence that they would never speak aloud to the living. There is a camaraderie here, a bond forged in mutual recognition of their predicament. But it is a melancholy camaraderie, the fellowship of the condemned rather than the brotherhood of the living. And when the Dreadnoughts are returned to their alcoves after a battle, when the tech priests begin the process of putting them back into stasis, there is sometimes a moment where the Dreadnoughts exchange final words. These words are rarely optimistic. They are acknowledgements of survival, confirmations that both parties have endured another awakening and will likely endure another in the future. They are expressions of a shared understanding that this existence will continue until the chassis is destroyed or the mind within finally breaks. They are, in their own way, farewells, because neither Dreadnought knows if they will both survive to the next time they are awakened together, or if one or both will fall in the intervening conflicts and never speak again. Some Dreadnoughts speak of the alienation that comes from mechanical existence. They describe the uncanny valley of sensation, the way that mechanical senses provide information without meaning. They can see through their optical senses, but what they see does not feel like sight. They can hear through their audio pickups, but the sounds lack the emotional resonance that natural hearing provides. They can feel through pressure sensors and gyroscopes, but it is a pale shadow of true proprioception. Everything is filtered, translated, rendered into data that their brains must then interpret. And over time, they begin to wonder if they are still experiencing the world at all, or merely processing reports about it. Other Dreadnoughts speak of the way that violence becomes their only point of connection with reality. In battle, when their weapons are firing and their chassis is moving and the enemy is dying before them, they feel something approaching their old clarity. The purpose is clear. The objectives are defined. The experience of combat, however alien it might be through mechanical senses, is still fundamentally the same activity they engaged in when they were flesh and blood. In those moments, they are space marines again, warriors serving the Emperor, and the horror of their existence recedes. But when the battle ends, when they are returned to their alcoves and the world goes quiet, the horror returns with redoubled force. A few Dreadnoughts speak of acceptance, of having made peace with their existence and finding a kind of equilibrium. But these accounts often have a hollow quality to them, as if the speaker is trying to convince himself as much as his audience. They speak of service and duty, of the honor of being chosen, of the importance of preserving their wisdom for future generations. But the words feel rehearsed, like a catechism repeated so many times that it has lost any real meaning. And when pressed, when asked directly if they are glad to have been entombed rather than allowed to die, even these, supposedly accepting Dreadnoughts, often fall silent, unable or unwilling to answer. There are also Dreadnoughts who have given up the pretense entirely. They acknowledge their existence as a curse, a punishment inflicted upon them by a chapter that valued their usefulness more than their well-being. These Dreadnoughts are often the ones who descend into madness most quickly because they lack even the thin comfort of the honor narrative to sustain them. But they also speak with a brutal honesty that makes their accounts particularly valuable for understanding the true nature of Dreadnought existence. They describe the entombment as a kind of death, not the clean death of a warrior falling in battle, but a slow death by attrition, a gradual fading away of everything that made them who they were until only the function remains. And perhaps that is the most horrifying aspect of Dreadnought existence, the way it reduces a person to a function. A space marine, for all his genetic enhancement and conditioning, is still a person. He has hopes and fears, preferences and dislikes, memories that define him and dreams that drive him. He is an individual, unique in all the galaxy. But when that space marine is entombed in a Dreadnought, The process begins of stripping away the individual and leaving only the warrior. The person fades, the memories erode, the personality flattens, and what remains is a weapon that can think but can no longer feel, a tactical asset that remembers how to fight but has forgotten why it once wanted to. This is the ultimate tragedy of the Dreadnought. It is not just that these warriors are trapped in mechanical prisons for centuries or millennia. It is that they are forced to watch themselves disappear. They are conscious for their own erasure, aware of the gradual loss of everything that made them who they were. They can feel the memories slipping away, can sense the connections to other people weakening, can recognize the growing distance between themselves and the living. And they are powerless to stop it, because the very structure of their existence, the cycles of stasis and awakening, the alien nature of mechanical sensation, the isolation from normal life, ensures that the erosion will continue until there is nothing left but the shell. In the end, every Dreadnought faces the same question. What am I? Am I still the space marine who was entombed in this chassis centuries ago? Am I the sum of the memories I can still recall, even if those memories are fading? Am I the tactical knowledge and combat experience that the chapter values? Am I the metal shell that moves and fights and speaks with a voice that no longer sounds human? Am I some combination of all these things? Or have I become something else entirely, something that was never meant to exist? These are not questions that have comfortable answers, and for Dreadnoughts who dwell on them too deeply, the only escape is the madness that claims so many of their kind. Better to stop asking, to stop questioning, to simply exist in the moment and fulfill the function. Better to be the weapon the chapter needs and stop trying to be the person you once were. Better to forget, even if forgetting means losing yourself, because the alternative is to remain aware of your own dissolution across centuries of creeping horror. The Imperium presents Dreadnought entombment as an honor, and in the context of its values and priorities, perhaps it is. But it is an honor built on suffering, sustained by the sacrifice of individuals who are given no real choice about whether to accept it. It is a practice that prioritizes the collective over the individual, that treats consciousness as a resource to be exploited rather than a phenomenon to be respected. And it is a perfect embodiment of the Imperium's fundamental philosophy, that there is no sacrifice too great, no horror too extreme, no price too high if it serves the survival of humanity. The foe. Dreadnoughts stand as monuments to this philosophy. They are walking testaments to the Imperium's willingness to inflict any suffering, to perpetrate any cruelty, if it can be justified in terms of necessity. They are proof that in the grim darkness of the far future, even immortality can be a curse, even service can be a prison, even honor can be indistinguishable from horror. And they serve. Across 1,000,000 worlds, in 1,000 chapters, the Dreadnoughts wake from their stasis and march to war. They fight with the fury of warriors who have nothing left to lose because everything has already been taken from them. They crush the Imperium's enemies with weapons that speak in thunder, their massive frames shaking the earth with each step. They are ancient and terrible, venerable and horrifying, honored and pitied in equal measure. They are the old ones, the revered dead, the ancient ones. They are the price the Imperium pays for victory, measured not in lives that end, but in lives that cannot end, that continue long past the point where mercy would grant them peace. If you have enjoyed this deep dive into one of Warhammer 40,000's most tragic elements, please consider subscribing to the channel. There is so much more to explore in this grim darkness of the far future. So many more stories of sacrifice and horror, duty and despair. Hit that like button if you found this examination of Dreadnought existence compelling, and let me know in the comments what other aspects of the 40K universe you would like to see explored in this format. The galaxy is vast, and the tales it holds are numberless. Until next time, remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, even immortality is not mercy.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.